Started now at 7:36. So just to let you formally know who we are, I'm going to introduce myself, then I'll hand over to Zahid from Abbey Properties to introduce himself. So my name is Venessa Afonja. I'm the owner director of an estate agency in Luton called VA Property Sales and Lettings. I've been a landlord myself for probably 13, 14 years, maybe a bit longer. And I started VA in 2009. So I've been in the landlord space, both personally and professionally, for a very long time at VA with a team where we sell, rent and manage properties. And the main objective of this evening was to, in a way, do what we call the landlord's homework for you guys and summarize some of the main things, the main issues, the main events that's taken place in the landlord property space this year, and then use that just to put our spin on what we think next year has in store for landlords and how we as property owners can best sort of prepare our mind, or at least get our thoughts on for the market ahead of us. So that was the reason why we've called it a live strategy event and not so much a webinar where we're teaching, but it's more looking back to kind of propel forward and just give advice and give our thoughts on the 2025 market to come. So that's me, Venessa from VA, and I'll hand over to Zahid to. Would you like to introduce yourself? Let everybody know who you are. This is the first time I've done some of you might have seen me before. I usually do webinars live on my own. So it's great to have a fellow agent in Luton today. So this is Zahid.
No, Vanessa, I just really appreciate you having me on board as well. It's really nice to sort of get into this for the first time as well. I have no experience of, previously doing like webinars, etc. Mainly, a lot of the time, what I tend to do is producing content. I was talking to Vanessa earlier on that a lot of the times you can shoot something really bad and then edit it afterwards as well. So it makes not too much of a problem. So I kind of compared it to like homework. I compared it to like an exam or coursework. So this is more so like an exam where it's live, you have to do it there and then. Coursework is more so like content creation where we get a chance to sort of edit it later on as well. So but anyway, first time, but it'll be good. Hopefully
you'll be fine. You'll be fine. He's just a little bit nervous, but he'll be fine. Live events are nerve-wracking for all of us, but the main thing is kind of who you are, what you do, how long you've been doing it.
So my name is Zahid. My company name is Abbey Property in Luton. We're one of the other agents inside Luton as well, Venessa, alongside myself as well. So I've been in the game since about 2008. Used to work with my brother previously, and then after I started my own company as well. So this has been going on for about 10 years roughly. I'm in the game to make sure every landlord profits from the investment property.
Nice. Yeah. I think that's music to my ears, and music to every landlord's ears. That's the reason why we're in the landlord business. So I think everyone will be looking forward to hearing your take on the market. So to kick off this evening, what we want to start off with, we're going to have a quick look at the market of 2024 first. I'm just going to share my screen. So we have a few slides that we want to talk through. So we want to touch on some of the main events in the investment space this year. Have you got the share screen?
I'm just trying to upload that. See what's happening here. I think that's the main screen right now. Reese, could you help out? Sorry. Are we on the main screen right now?
Yeah, your screen shared. I can see your screen.
Yeah.
You can see the VA screen,
Yeah.
Reese?
That's cool.
Okay, fabulous. If you can see the VA screen, then we're good to go.
Just full screen it.
Oh, it just needs full screen here. Yeah? Okay, cool. That one there.
Perfect.
Is that full screen, Reese?
It is indeed.
That's fine. So
Second one there. You can control the screen from here. It's the next screen.
okay. So first of all, we want to kick off with looking back at 2024. And yes, we're still in the year, a few weeks to go, but one of the main things that have come out of this year from a landlord investor point of view, I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, will be familiar with what's known as the Renters' Rights Bill. So this is what was before, under the Conservative government, the Renters' Reform Bill, but when Labour came in, they changed it to Renters' Rights Bill. And this is something as landlords that we need to be fairly clued up on. It's quite a detailed bill, so it'd be very difficult for you to know everything, but some of the main points that will affect us as investors, we feel that it's really, really important that you understand, so that you can use that to plan and think ahead of your property strategy next year. So we're going to talk through just probably about 5 or 6 parts of the Renters' Rights Bill, because that's going to have an effect on us, on how we work as landlords next year. So he's going to work with me on this one. I don't think we could do 2 screens at the same time, so use your notes.
That's fine. I think
So we wanted to be a little bit kind of futuristic today and have 2 presentations going at the same time, but it might be a little bit tricky.
should we do this instead?
Use yours.
Give like a rough over guide.
Okay.
And then you can crack on with that part. And then
Okay.
when it comes to mine, I'll flip over.
Okay, so what we'll do, so we'll work with one presentation. So one of the main things, if you may or may not be aware, is to do with the abolishment of the Section 21 notice, which will be coming through next year. The Renters' Rights Bill is being talked about being mandatory probably by the end of the summer.
Yes.
By the end of the summer next
Possibly
year.
earlier than that. So we might get a bit of a shake up on it. So it might be like an instance of kind of notice to crack on with it.
Okay, but I think no later than summer, we'll see a lot of this coming through as mandatory legislation, and the abolishment of the Section 21 notice is huge, because at the moment we all should know as landlords that, you know, the Section 21 notice is a no fault eviction notice that we can give our tenants if we want our property back for any reason, as long as they're not in a fixed term contract. Now, with the Renters' Rights Bill next year, they're taking that away. So do you want to explain what that's going to mean for landlords and how a landlord wants their property back? You want your property back to either sell or to move in it for yourself. How's it going to work?
So the way that's going to work is you're going to have to run through Section 8 instead. And there's only going to be certain grounds which are going to be compulsory for the tenant to leave in, and there will be certain grounds which are going to be discretionary. So it's totally up to the judge to decide if he asks the tenant to leave or not. And plus, a lot of them depend on severity. So it's completely down to the discretion of the judge to decide. So we're going to delve into that very shortly and have a look at more detail about what those are going to be, and also how you can sort of best prepare yourself to make sure you have as much success rate as possible. But we will be going to that very shortly. It's like a quick synopsis, but we will be going through that in detail shortly.
Oh, another point on the Renters' Rights Bill next year, and this is probably another really very big one for us landlords, is the bill will then will abolish fixed term tenancies. So right now, the majority of us, when we rent our properties out on ASTs, we rent them out for a minimum of a year. So going forward under the Renters' Rights Bill, there will be no more fixed term. All tenancies will be an immediate periodic rolling contract. Now, you can look at this, I think, as 2 ways as a landlord. The government say it offers flexibility for landlords. So if you do decide that you have a reason or a need for your property back, you're not tied into a year. But that's not quite the case when you read the finer detail of having no fixed term tenancies, because even though when we give out these tenancies next year, there's no fixed term on paper, the tenant is actually protected for the first 12 months. So even though technically speaking, there's no fixed contract between yourself and a tenant when this bill comes through, but the tenant will have a protection from being evicted for the first 12 months. So in essence, we still have a 1-year tenancy.
Yeah, more so related to the tenant and not as much from the landlord side. So this is, I mean, like the name it says it, Renters' Rights Bill. So, you know, it does what it says in the tin.
Yeah, it does seem quite heavily tipped towards the renters side of things. So I think that's where our job as agents and as landlords, we have to think, and we have to box clever as to how we're going to make these rules and these legislations work for us. I mean, the landlord legislation is a constant changing game. So it's looking at what's coming through and how we're going to make this work for the new landlord market. But yes, in essence, the tenant will have protection for the first 12 months. So if next year, by any chance, when this comes through, you want your property back for any particular reason, another thing is the notice that a landlord will have to give is changing from 2 months, which is the usual Section 21 notice period, to 4 months. So if you're thinking ahead next year and you're thinking you may want to sell 1 or 2 of your properties, once this law comes through, you'll have to give your tenants notice at the start of month 8 to safely have that 4 months notice if you want to end your tenancy. So things like this are really important for us to think about as landlords, because before we didn't have so much waiting time before we needed to give notice to request our properties back. So I think this is going to be huge, because I think with the changes in interest rates, with a lot of the changes in taxation, and a lot of the legal changes, some landlords may be thinking or looking at selling. So your timing and looking at how you're going to work with that once this becomes once the bill becomes mandatory becomes even more important, because if in effect it will double the length of time that you need to request your houses back or your properties back. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Zahid?
I mean, from what I can see, right, it's going to be an absolutely massive shake-up in the rental market. So the landlords are going to have to come up with new strategies. Investors are going to have to come up with new strategies. Even letting agents, how are we going to be dealing with all of this? How are we going to be dealing with all the staff training at the same time as well? How is all the rental insurance companies? They're going to have a massive shake-up at the same time as well, because they have to either charge more, or they're going to have to put more clauses in place. Maybe they might be pushing it more onto the agents or the landlords to say, you know what, you didn't deal with this compliance correctly, so hence we're not going to protect you anymore from this, because you might start the insurance, but you know, you've got that for like a year, for example, you're paying that whole time, but in month 18 when you need to claim on it, you'll find out that there was one piece of compliance that you haven't sort of kept up with. And as a landlord, to sort of be able to educate yourself on that, it's going to be really tricky, even as a letting agent, to make sure we're on top of it as well. We're making sure all our staff are on top of it at the same time as well, making sure we check over the staff work at the same time as well, to make sure that there's nothing that's being missed out, producing checklists, being as thorough as possible with it, making sure a senior has a look at it before all the files are put away. So there's going to be a lot of massive sort of shake-ups that are going to be taking place. But I would also say at the same time is that it's an opportunity as well. So we have to be proactive rather than being reactive about it. So I would say there is good inside it as well. I mean, there's a lot of rogue landlords out there, right? So if you guys enjoyed this conversation today, that means you're definitely not wrong, because you're conscious, you want to do something about it, you want to do right by the tenant at the same time as well. So you want to be prepared and be in the right place. So what that's possibly going to also mean is that a lot of them are going to be taken out of the market. So that is possibly going to mean that you're going to get better rents and you're going to get better tenants at the same time as well. And that's possibly going to mean that you're going to improve the market overall at the same time. So maybe it's not entirely doom and gloom. There is some positives to take away from it as well. But like I said, let's be proactive rather than being reactive.
Agreed. No, agreed. I think with the abolishment of the Section 21 and having no fixed term tenancies, I think like what Zahid is saying is it's going to be more important now more than ever. I mean, it's always important, but from next year with the bill, that our back office as landlords is compliant, our paperwork is checked, everything is done, because when it comes to no fixed term tenancy and you want to do something with that property or with that tenancy, if your paperwork is not literally 100%, yeah, you may struggle to get that property back. I think one of the other things coming through that we want to touch on ahead for next year, which is a really big one, and we get this a lot in Luton, it's around the Awaab's law, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but it's to do with it's more or less around having a decent home standard. The Awaab's law came in because of an unfortunate death of a young toddler, a young baby who died in a property. It was a social landlord, not a private sector landlord, but a social landlord, and the property, there were mold issues and things like that. And unfortunately, this young child died as a result of respiratory issues. So the Awaab's law has come in to ensure that landlords, and I think this is a good thing from a landlord tenant point of view, to ensure that our properties are up to par when it comes to how they're kept in terms of the structural maintenance. If you do experience, and we do see there's a lot of properties in Luton, if you do experience issues with your property around mold, damp, condensation, with the renters' rights bill coming in, I think the Awaab's law is going to be even harder hitting for us as landlords. We're going to have very tight and legal timeframes in which that you need to deal with an issue. If a tenant sort of says, oh, the property's got damp, the property's got mold, there's going to be a very, very finite time that the law gives us as landlords to deal with those issues before we fall foul of Awaab's law. And again, that's to number one, always to protect life. That's always priority in all cases, which is, you know, all our concern first and foremost. So I think as landlords, if you've ever experienced issues with your property relating to mold issues or damp issues or anything like that, where a tenant has raised those sort of concerns, and maybe we've sat back, or maybe we've thought, well, it's condensation, and we've moved on past it, as we move into the being landlords next year onwards, it's something that we're not going to be able to just maybe not lightly brush over and say, well, it's condensation, just open your windows, turn on your heating, because that tends to be a lot of what's said. But I think now those sort of accusations by tenants will need to be looked at properly, just to make sure that it isn't anything else. And if it is things to do with condensation, which we experience all the time, the tenants are then properly educated on how to ventilate, how to look after properties, how to keep condensation related mold away, so that you don't have a situation that then starts to kind of like multiply and exaggerate. So I think looking at the Awaab's law part of the Renters' Rights Bill, we're going to have to be on top of our properties when our tenants raise any type of health and safety, I would say, related issue. So that's something to bear in mind, particularly if you have had a property experience where you've had that sort of issue with your property. I think tenants will be quite switched on to this law, and they will kind of use it if they have to. So I think for me, that's one thing that, you know, we're ensuring that our management landlords are very much on the ball with.
Yeah, and a lot of the time, for example, like things are open to sort of interpretation, right? But what this is going to be doing is that it's going to be making sure everything is standardized. So it's going to have like certain sort of criteria that you're going to have to meet. And if you're not able to meet it, the government, sorry, the local authorities are going to have power now to be able to prosecute you. And the fines are really eye-watering. We're looking at £5,000. You're also looking at £30,000 fines at the same time as well. And a lot of it, I mean, previously in the past, sometimes you could possibly get away with it because you could say this or you could say that. But now you're looking at even banning orders. So if the council feels that you're not good at what you're doing, they could put a banning order on you. You're no longer able to rent out the property. Also, what they're possibly looking at introducing as well is that if you're not in a good enough sort of capability to be able to rent out your property and to keep up with your compliance, they will take it off you, rent it out for you, and whatever's left of the rent, pass it on to you. I mean, a lot of the time, we don't really want to be in that sort of position because that's a lot of profit margins that are going to be taken away. I mean, a lot of the times it might be the case that previously you were able to sort of keep up with the mortgage payments, but now you're going to have to sort of fork out your own payment because everyone knows the council is not very efficient. So a lot of the income or a lot of the profit margin that you possibly could be taken away, that's also going to be going towards inefficiencies at the same time. So it's really important now more than ever before to be able to keep on top of that, because if a banning order comes against you, it's a real tough job to be able to get out of it.
Yeah, we don't want to make this sound. We don't want to make this sound all doom and gloom. We don't want to make this sound all doom and gloom, because obviously the long and short of it is, there's a shortage of properties in the market. There are more people looking for homes than the government have homes for. So the government does need us as landlords, as investors. They do, despite this Renters' Rights Bill being obviously very heavily tipped to the renter. The long and short of it is, the government need homes. You know, there are not enough homes for people out there. So I think it's just looking at what's coming through on the bill and looking at how we navigate it as landlords. Another thing that they're going to be bringing in, which we need to be aware of under the bill, is an ombudsman for landlords. At the moment, there's we have an ombudsman that we have to belong to as agents, but they're talking about bringing in a specific landlord ombudsman and a database, where for, of course, a compliance fee as landlords we would have to pay to be part of the ombudsman, be listed on this database. So it's almost like keeping a record of all landlords and the property stock that they hold. I think for me personally, one of the things that I don't really like about this concept behind the bill is that the ombudsman is pretty much all for the tenants. So if tenants have complaints, if tenants have issues, they will have free and easy access to raise those complaints via the ombudsman. And of course, the ombudsman will then contact us as landlords to look into and review what's happening, but we can't sort of take a case to the ombudsman first. So again, a lot of what we're saying, if not nearly everything we're saying, is going to always go back to having your landlord house in order, and that literally your landlord house in order, your paperwork, the state of your properties. Because if the tenants now have an ombudsman that they can freely report to when things are, when they feel things are not working well or working right in their properties, that's going to be another bit of pressure that we might face if we get a letter from the landlord ombudsman to review a complaint. So again, it's all about keeping in compliance and keeping our landlord back office in order. Just to mention, if anybody's got any questions, because we want to do take questions and answers and not wait till we get to the end, so we can answer any thoughts or questions as they come up. Please drop them in the Zoom chat, and then we'll go through them and we'll pick them out, because we're coming towards the end of the session on the renters' rights bill. Can we see questions?
Just give me 1 second before you head up.
Is there any questions? Let me just have a look on the chat box. Yes. Okay. Okay, so there's a question here. So Natalie's asking, in the next 10 years, can you see the government helping out landlords rather than putting them off through the new renters bill and various other recent changes? I mean, they'll hopefully realize that they need landlords. That's exactly what I just said, in the sense of the fact remains that we don't have enough homes in this country for people. So yes, the government needs to, I think when the bill comes through, the government are going to have to look at how this is going to work, because if they suddenly start to see a massive exit of landlords, i.e. landlords selling up, then of course it defeats the objective of trying to provide homes for people. So do we have a crystal ball? You know, what kind of changes, you know, can we foresee the government doing to help us as landlords? No idea, but I do know that if there's a sudden exit, if they start to look at the numbers and they see a big exit of landlords going, they're going to definitely have to look at how they I guess tweak the renters' rights bill, because ultimately we need, you know, we're the provider of homes, which is what they need. So that's a good question. There's another question here. Any government grants available for Awaab's law? Not that I'm aware of. It all depends on and so with the grants for properties, like any grant, usually it all depends on the criteria of your property. So if there are grants available at all, if any at all, it will all be property and sometimes individual criteria met. So it may be that your property will have to be a certain kind of listing or a certain EPC grading. Whenever there are grants available, whether it's for upgrades to properties under the Green Homes Bill, it's usually always criteria based. So we would need to look into that and see if the government are planning on putting anything out there to help landlords, particularly when it comes to issues related to Awaab's law. I think that's a good one, because especially when you're talking about very older build properties that maybe not there, that won't necessarily have the more current what do you call it,
EPC,
not EPC, but the insulation, the, you know, things that will make a property more energy efficient. And yes, it is EPC, I guess. Then yes, we'd like to think there'd be some assistance to support with those type of properties, because obviously older builds may be subject more to damp and mold related issues than maybe brand new properties. So we need to watch this space, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing at the same time as well is that anytime you introduce something new, there is going to be some sort of teething taking place at the same time as well, right? So right now you can see that a lot of these laws that are being introduced, they are going to be revised later on as well. There will be small sort of amendments that are going to be made to them at the same time as well, because a lot of the time you don't really know necessarily how the market will react to it, how tenants, landlords, other sort of institutions or whatever might react to it, and how that's going to be having a knock-on effect on other places. I mean, what they do at the same time is that they do try to test it out in Scotland, test it out in Wales, and then roll it out into England. So Scotland and Wales is going to be like the guinea pig, right?
Absolutely.
So, but at the same time, having said that, it's different markets as well. So you are going to have different things that are going to be taking place here. So, like, to answer your question, is there going to be some sort of grants or whatever? Possibly there might be, depending on how many landlords struggle, depending on how many cases there are, depends on case by case scenario. So we will, like Vanessa said, watch the space. We're going to find out exactly what's going to be going on.
Yeah, there's a good question here that's come through from somebody on Instagram that says, if landlords give their property to an agent, do they still need to register for the ombudsman scheme? The answer to that is yes. Yeah, unfortunately, whether you're with an agent or if you're self-managing the property, from what I understand about this part of the bill, it's the landlord itself. Or the landlord yourself and your property that needs to register on the landlord database, regardless of whether you're managed or you're self-managed. So yeah.
What tends to happen with that as well is for example, like a HMO license that you might have, right? So with that, you will have a manager that takes place that's going to be linked to your license. So for example, just let's just say specifically to do with HMOs, you're going to have a manager that's going to be able to deal with all the compliance, dealing with, for example, the fire safety, alarms, etc., all these kind of things as well, right? So you will have someone assigned to it. A lot of the time, it's your letting agent that tends to take part of that. My guess also would be that when it comes to this, there will be some sort of assigning, there will be some sort of link between them at the same time as well. So what that's going to mean is if you have registered, etc., it's going to also become your letting agent's responsibility to keep you on top of that. I mean, just like your accountant, a lot of them, they do your submissions for you, right? So it will be the same thing when it comes to this. Your agent will be the one that's going to be liable, not liable, but also jointly maybe connected to you to be able to make sure you're compliant with everything. I mean, there's going to be quite a lot of stuff that you're going to have to update on the portals, on the government portal that I'll be touching up on very shortly. That is going to become your legal obligation to be able to do that. I'll touch up on that very shortly. These things are not going to be simple, straightforward sometimes. So it will be really important that your letting agents are on top of this to make sure that they are keeping you compliant, because if they're not keeping you compliant, you're going to have that responsibility, and the letting agent is going to also have the same responsibility. So you want to make sure that when these changes are coming on board, your letting agent knows about them and is fully aware of it, because like we're doing at the moment, right? Although this hasn't even come out yet, maybe it's going to come out in 3 months, 6 months, maybe even 9 months. I reckon earlier than that anyway. But the main thing is we have to be prepared for it, because can you imagine the number of landlords that are going to get in trouble within the first month? Because that's a really hot time for the council to sort of get onto it, right? And then, like we know, a lot of the councils right now, they don't have too much money inside their pocket right now. So they're really hungry to be able to get all this money, and landlords are the perfect place to be able to get this money from.
I think we could. I think the renters' rights bill is, there's so much to cover on it, but we're conscious of time as well, that we want to keep the agenda moving for the evening. So if there's we could do with the renters' rights. So I think we're going to keep moving in terms of what else we want to cover. We want to look at where we've been with rents this year and where we think rents are going next year. I think it's really important. I mean, yes, the compliance and the renters' rights bill is a huge part of what we have to take on board next year, but the tenancy market, certainly in the Luton area, because I'm conscious that people joining will have properties in different areas, but certainly in the Luton Beds area, the tenancy rental market has been very strong this year in terms of the level of rents that we've seen that we can achieve. We've seen a slight cooling down, I would say, in the last 4 months of this year, and I think that when I say cooling down in terms of the rents that we're achieving, it's probably where properties have been overpriced and overinflated, but the rental market is strong. I think from a growth point of view, if we're comparing 2024 to 2023, probably rents in Luton, from my personal experience, I would say is up at least close to 8%. Most of them we're achieving, anything between 7%, sometimes even 10% more on the same type of property this year than we did last year. So from a landlord's point of view, that's very positive, because obviously we're achieving more for our properties. Yes, the interest rates have changed, they've gone up, they've started to come down, but in terms of rents, the rent market is very, very strong. And I think that with the rents being fairly expensive, if we're to say honestly, with the rent market being fairly expensive, what we're seeing is tenants are actually staying in properties longer, because what's happening is, where you have as a landlord, if you've had a tenant in your property for a couple of years or more, and maybe they're paying slightly under the current market value, and they know that because it's very, very transparent, we're finding that tenants are not moving around as quick anymore, because they know that the minute they look outside for another property that's similar or equivalent to what they have, they may be paying upwards of 5-10% more in rent. So in that sense, we're seeing good tenants stay in properties for longer, because obviously they're trying to budget and keep their costs down. And what landlord doesn't want a good paying tenant who doesn't default, even if you're just slightly under market value. It's also worth its weight in gold when you have a good long-term tenant who's paying you consistently on time every time. I don't see that changing much into the new year in terms of how long tenants will stay in properties. I think we'll still see that tenant retention, which is a good thing for us as landlords. I do think the rents will rise a bit more next year. I think when I was reading some statistics from Rightmove, and they were predicting that rents for 2025 might rise as much as 4 or 5% by the end of 2025. So I think we'll see another uplift in how much properties will command for their rent. I mean, what do you think, Zahid, in terms of rent valuations?
I mean, you have to bear in mind that this is all going to be a burden of admin, right? Administration. So someone has to eventually pay for it. I mean, at the same time, you have to remember that if the landlords have to get a certain amount of profit margin, or some of them are not even getting some sort of profit margin, right? They may be just able to keep up with their mortgage payments. Now, let's say, for example, someone's renting out a property for £1,200, but all the admin burden has gone up by another £30 every single month, right? So that is going to slowly trickle in, and you're going to be able to see it. I mean, it's not going to be the case that, for example, you got your renter's refund bill's going to come out in summer, right? And bang, straight away, you're going to see a massive change. You have to bear in mind, some people are going to be within the tenancy as well. So as that comes up for a renewal, because you can only renew every 12 months, slowly but surely, within 12, maybe 18 months or something, the rents will carry on going up as the market adjusts to that. Because the letting agents will have a lot more burden. Maybe they're going to be increasing some of the fees to be able to sort of keep up with that as well. All the staff training they're going to have to be dealing with, and plus other things, especially the compliance that's going to have to be dealt with. Even if you're a landlord and managing yourself, there's going to be a lot more work involved. If you're working full time, then you have to do this on top of at the same time as well. It's going to have to be worthwhile for you to be able to crack on with this. So generally speaking, I feel also that the rents are going to be going up. I mean, it's a bit strange how the government is doing all of this to be able to control rents, but it's going to definitely have the opposite intended effect.
Absolutely. And I think also when with the rents going up, and they have been up, like I said, for the last year or so, if not longer, the expectation though from a tenant will also be up, because if you put yourself into a tenant's shoes, some of us may be tenants as well here, if you're going to be paying such high amounts for your rent, you're also going to expect that property to deliver. So tenants' expectations we find are a lot higher these days, and I don't see that changing next year in terms of the type of properties that you're bringing to market as a landlord. So I mean, we're not properties that have to be 5-star hotels, but we are looking for good, solid properties, houses, flats, good kitchens, good bathrooms. Those 2 rooms are always going to be your fundamental rooms that get your properties let quicker than the one next door. So I think from a landlord point of view, if you're thinking ahead of next year, if you have a tenant that might leave, or you're investing in a new property, you want to be thinking what is going to help you to achieve that high rent which the market is commanding, which a tenant will pay for. So investing into your property and thinking about things like kitchen updates or makeovers and bathrooms, those are going to be fundamental for you as a landlord to achieve those high rents next year from what the market is commanding. So I think that we also have to think as landlords, when we're bringing our properties to market, whether it's for the first time or on a relet, what does our property have to offer? I often see landlords say things like, well, this 2 beds now are going for £1,300 a month in Luton. That's what I'd like to achieve, but yet their particular property doesn't tick any boxes for a £1,200-1,300 2-bed. It doesn't work that way. You have to bring the property to the market with the aspects that the tenant will pay that £1,200 for. It might sound like, well, that's obvious, Vanessa, but you'll be surprised that landlords will want to follow the rent increase trend, but not necessarily follow the trend to ensure that property meets that money. So as landlords, please be doing things little and often where we can to our properties, because we all know that it can be very expensive to do a full-on renovation, but doing little things and often to your property, maybe in between tenancy breaks, or when you have an opportunity to, if you have long-term tenants and you can make arrangements to go in and do little updates, do that. Because if you want to keep in line with the market high levels of rent, then your property has to follow suit. And because we don't see rents changing in the next 12 months, our properties are going to have to ensure they're stepped up to meet that affordability, or meet that rent, the rent demand really for the money.
Definitely. I mean, you have to bear in mind at the same time as well, as just like anything else that you're offering, it is a service. So if your neighbors offering a better service for the same price, clearly someone's going to be going next door instead, right? Or it might be the case that, look, you're both offering something similar, but theirs is bit better. the tenant has got a budget as well to pay a higher amount. So if that is your strategy in terms of what you're going to be looking to achieve, right? Because I mean, every market is different. So, for example, when I've been abroad in certain countries, if you've got furnished property, you literally get double the rent. It was absolutely crazy when I found that out, right? So I was thinking to myself, why doesn't everyone do that? I still can't find out the answer why they don't do that. I mean, in the UK, it's slightly bit different. There's other things that are going to be able to give you a bit more of a lucrative return on investment. So there'll be things like, for example, keeping your property nicely decorated, aesthetically pleasing, etc. Airbnb, a lot of people have been going into. There's different strategies, HMOs, etc. Everything. So you have to look at how you're going to be able to, you know, make it as lucrative as possible for yourself, whilst also offering a really good service to the end consumer at the same time as well. So that's something you're really going to have to think about, and definitely talk to your letting agent about it as well, because they are the expert. They'll be able to provide you the best information, because they deal with it on a day-to-day basis. They know what's going to work for a studio flat, for a 1-bed, 2-bed, 3-bed, even like a 5-6 bedroom house, maybe even like, you know, something like a cottage or whatever else you might have, right? There's a lot of different properties you might have, so it's good to look at different strategies that you might want to deploy.
There's a couple of questions coming through. Someone here is asking, as letting agents, how much do you help support in getting a HMO license, and how hard is it to get one? So if you're looking at, again, diversifying your rents and trying to get more out of your property, a HMO strategy may be an avenue for you as an agent. We can help and support you. If you have a property that's suitable for HMO rentals, then yes, we can help you. There's services that we offer that help you walk through, you know, filling out your application, doing the compliance, getting your certificates. So yes, that is a service that most letting agencies will offer. You just need to check with, you know, either with one of us or your local agent, depending on where you are. But yes, a HMO strategy is a good strategy. That's another way us as investors can maximize the return of our properties. And yes, there's compliance that goes with that. But if you get the right property in the right location and you keep your voids down, the HMO strategy is another very good one to ensure that, you know, you take up the rise in those rents. Just to move forward, we want to cover a couple of other things that, you know, that's come through this year that will have an effect on us next year. Obviously, everyone's will know about the changes in the interest rates, where we've had interest rates up for some time, and now they've slightly started to come down. I think with interest rates dropping a couple of times in the last 6 months, that has seen a slight shift in terms of the increase in the number of buyers that have come back through on the market looking to purchase properties. On the investor side, I see from my point of view, there are still investors coming out to purchase property, but it's a lot harder because properties are so expensive. And as investors, we know it's all about the numbers game. You're finding that the investor market from a buying point of view has slowed down a bit because of the cost, not to mention obviously the stamp duty has been increased on us. So I think that we'll see the investor market probably be a little bit more conservative when it comes to purchasing, because we're going to have to number crunch that much harder due to the interest rates, due to the increase in stamp duty, to ensure that rent so the property that we're buying has a good return. I think in all things, when I talk about investment purchasing, it's all about the long term. I think that if you're in the property market, you've got to be in it for the long term. And when I say the long term, I would say a minimum of at least 5 to 7 years, if not longer, if you can, because that's where you'll be able to weather the storm. And so if you come in on a certain interest rate, you know, that will weather itself through 7 years down the line. Your equity value will hopefully grow within the 7-year period. So I think if you're looking at investing in new properties as we move into 2025, it's always about the numbers when it comes to investment, but I think it's also about having a medium to long-term plan ahead of you. I think things like flips are going to be a lot more tricky to do. And you know, you're going to have to be searching very, very strategically and very hard to find those kind of flip deals, because when you look at all the costs involved, you know, you'll want to question whether the flip is worth it, depending on what you purchase and how much you spend. So yes, the sales investment market is there, but I think it's going to be a more conservative market, which we've seen this year, and I think we'll see that mirrored into 2025. Another one of the changes, just before we move forward, to just touch on very briefly, because a lot of us might be lease holders in terms of we own apartments and flats and maisonettes that are on leases. The leaseholder reform bill, that was something that came through in the spring of this year. which is actually really positive, because when you look at the Renters' Rights Bill, it feels very negative from a landlord's point of view, whereas the Leaseholder Reform Bill is actually looking to make things cheaper for us as investor landlords who own leasehold properties. So what that reform is looking to do for us, if you do own a leasehold property, is lower the cost that it will cost you to renew your lease if you have a property with a lease that's 80 years or less. And I think that's massive, because so often we see landlords come into market with flats of 75 years, 60 years, 50 years, and there's a massive chunk of value that they lose because their lease is so low. So with the Leaseholder Reform Bill making it cheaper, hopefully, for us to renew our leases, that would be a positive for anyone who does own an apartment on a short lease. So if you do, it might be worth you just hanging in there for another year or so to see what this reform comes out with, and then you'll know which way to move in terms of renewing your leases or selling your properties with short leases.
Definitely. Also, another thing to add on to that, it might be the case that you can split your property into two later on as well. There's going to be more details coming out about that. I don't want to comment too much on it, because it's not fully clear yet exactly what types of properties will be eligible for that, which ones won't be eligible for that. But as soon as the information is a lot more clear on that, we will definitely have another webinar about that, just to be able to show you which type of properties will be eligible for that and how to make sure that it's lucrative for you at the same time as well.
If there are any other questions, I'll have just quick look in the chat box as well. If there are any other questions, page 2. Yeah.
That one,
Next one. That's fine. Okay, so as we reflect on 2024 and we're looking into next year, as landlords and investors, how can we be best prepared for the property market in the new year? I think if you think back to everything we've said in the last 45 minutes or so, a lot of it is going to be down to being prepared on your compliance, your back office side of things. I think when there's any sort of shake up in legislation, particularly landlord and tenant legislation, it's always going to be about your paperwork. It's always going to be about, have you done the right things? And not just have you done the right things in terms of setting up your tenancies, but do you actually have the evidence to prove that? Because most of this all lies on evidence, really. So I think in terms of being prepared as landlords as we go into the new market next year, tenant vetting, which is never to be compromised, but it's going to be even more important based on the kind of restrictions we'll have as landlords to maneuver the tenancy market next year. Our tenant vetting is going to have to be much tighter, really on the ball, and ensuring that our tenancy legal compliance, we've ticked all those boxes, and not only have we ticked them, but we can evidence, whether that's through an agency or if you're doing it on your own, you can evidence that you've issued certain contracts, you've issued, you've protected deposits, you've issued the paperwork to go along with your deposits, you've issued EPCs, your EPCs have the correct rating. There's so many things that tenancy legals compliance boils down into, but you're going to have to be able, the burden of proof will always be on us as the landlord, and obviously us as your letting agency if you have a managed agent. So making sure that your compliance is there, really. I think that's something not to compromise on next year.
100%. So a lot of letting agents, a lot of landlords have been using templated tenancy agreements for the last God knows how many years, right? And they've never really had to do too much of a change. It's not going to be like a huge amount of changes that have kind of taken place, although there has been changes that have taken place. The problem here is that this particular time there's a huge amount of change taking place, right? And a lot of the, for example, the clauses that you might have in here, or terms or whatever within your tenancy agreement, they're going to be just scrapped, and they won't be eligible for that same time as well. And what you might be thinking is that I've written it down in here, it will be enforceable, etc., but they won't be enforceable. So you need to look at new sort of clauses or new sort of ways that you can make sure that your tenants are compliant or they're complying with the terms and conditions, etc., of the tenancy agreement. And at the same time, how you're going to be enforcing that same time as well, because you don't want to be enforcing it in a way that's going to backfire on you later on. So it's really important to be well prepped for this. And one of the key ways to be able to do this is to really revisit the tenancy agreement and make sure everything is on point there.
Absolutely. And I think just to add on to that is protection of our tenancies next year. I personally at VA, we've seen a lot more landlords take out rent guarantee and legal cover insurances this year. Again, you know, we don't want to be in a situation, and it can happen to anybody at any time. And the longer you are a landlord, in my experience, the more likely you may come across a situation where you have a tenant who can't pay or won't pay for whatever reason, and you want to ensure that you're protected. And I think with the rents being so high, protecting your rent income now as a landlord is absolutely essential. So looking at things like rent guarantee and legal cover, we at VA personally have had to use it probably about 10 times this year, which doesn't sound like a big number, but if I look back to years past, we've maybe used it once or twice, and this year we're sort of like the 10 or 12 times. So when you're looking at the percentage difference, it is a lot where tenants have defaulted either through you know, genuine reasons, or some that have just defaulted because that's what they want to do, and we've had to take formal action. Some landlords have been covered with insurance, and unfortunately other landlords haven't, and it's cost those landlords without the insurance protection a lot of money, a lot of stress, and a lot of negative emotion. So as a landlord going into 2025, do think about, you know, protecting your income. Yes, it comes at a cost, and as landlords we just think, well, another cost, you know, how much money is there in this pot to begin with? But I think with insurance, it's just one of those peace of mind boxes that is good to tick, because if it does happen to you, you know, God forbid it does, but if it does, that's when you know the value of it. So for a few £100 for a 12-month protection, this could, you know, literally pay you thousands if you have a default situation. And especially with the renters' rights bill, where things will be, as we can see, more tipped towards the renters' side. If things do start to go wrong and you do experience rental income loss, this is where the value of a rent guarantee insurance products will really sort of pay dividends for you. So I think that's something for you to think about, and put that in your notes for next year, as you're either, you know, starting with fresh tenancies or buying new properties and coming back to market with fresh opportunities. Think about ultimately protecting yourself with insurance.
Definitely. I mean, look, like yourself, Vanessa, you know as well that a lot of the time it's the landlords, they always have that regret, you know, I wish I took out the rent insurance policy. And to be honest, a lot of the times, you know, you don't necessarily need it, but there will be times when you do need it. Is it better to have it? That's something you're gonna have to sort of, you know, weigh up yourself and calculate the numbers, etc. Because if you got like, you know, generally speaking, insurance tends to be back between £200 to £300, right? But let's say, for example, you got 3 months default, that's like about £3,000 or something. That could have covered you for about 10 years. Do you see what I mean? So that's something you're gonna have to keep into consideration as well, and especially now considering how much more it's going to be difficult for landlords and letting agents as well, and how much more tenants can sort of exploit the situation as well. That's something you should definitely look into, at least for the next 12 months or so.
I think, yeah, well, I think while we're weathering the new legislation, it's a good time. Yeah, I think if anything, even if it's just as you're taking on a new tenant in the new year, and I often say this to my landlords, you know, sometimes they're reluctant to do the insurance for different reasons. I say, well, do it for at least the first 2 years. If you really can stretch that affordability, that will give you time to see the tenant pattern in terms of how they pay their rent on time, in full. So I always encourage landlords, especially if the rents are on the higher side, so where you're renting, you know, the bigger properties that are commanding 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 1700 pounds a month, you know, it's definitely worth protecting initially, and then seeing how you feel, and then you decide whether you want to take the risk thereafter. We have a question in the room that says, I've always gone down the guarantor route. Yeah, the guarantor route is absolutely, you know, it's a great one to go down if if you're renting a property out for the first time or on a relet. If a tenant can get a guarantor, then yes, of course, because that's another fallback plan to the tenant. But it literally is that, it's a fallback plan. And I find that sometimes with guarantors, yes, they've signed the legal contract, so they are legally obligated to that tenancy, and you can take them to court, but it can be a very, very long, difficult, drawn out process. So if somebody was to ask me guarantor versus rent guarantee insurance, I would go rent guarantee insurance, because every time, because you just,
you know you're gonna get paid.
yeah, you know you're going to get paid. As
Yeah.
long as, you know, as long as you have your back office in order, you know you're going to get paid. You're not going to be struggling to find this guarantor that's now decided to move halfway across the world.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's not a negative, it's a positive thing to have behind a tenancy, but just know that it's not always as seamless when you need to call on that guarantor to pay up, or, you know, get that tenant to do what you want them to do. So just bear that in mind.
Yeah, like Vanessa said, that make sure your back office is in order. Reason being is because, you know, you might have the best tenant for 1-2 years, etc., and you think, you know what, everything's fine, they're okay, I know them from a friend or something or whatever, etc. But the thing is, if you don't have your compliance in place, you're gonna have a massive issue later on. You know, it could be like, for example, your neighbor that's been with you for the last 10 years and his landlord is selling up and he comes and moves into your property, etc., because you're moving out. But a year later, for example, it's absolute havoc, right? So regardless if you know the person, you don't know the person, however you're dealing with the tenancy, you just want to make sure that everything is covered, because the last thing you want is you go to court, it's thrown out because of this. Next time you go again, it's thrown out because of that. And the thing is, sometimes, for example, it might be something as simple like a gas safety, right? If the tenant doesn't want to leave, he's not going to give you access for gas safety. So, you know, that's things you're going to have to sort of figure out ahead of time. You don't want to be in that kind of position later on where, you know, the tenant sort of, you know, has you, right? So do you want to be prepped for that beforehand, and you just want to be prepped for every sort of eventuality that could possibly take place?
Yeah, and that's where guarantee and legal comes in. I think, but I think I'm conscious that we don't want to sound too negative, because at the end of the day, we're landlords, we're investors. You know, we're here for, you know, we're here to make money from being property investors and give, you know, good, decent homes to people. And I think that next year the opportunities will still be there. It's just looking a lot deeper at your property strategy. I would say if we're looking at investing in new properties next year, which a lot of people still will, despite the stamp duty rise and things like that, it's looking at properties that what I would call would have a wide tenant catchment opportunity. So if you're looking at properties, obviously depending on what your budget is and what location you're looking to purchase in, you want to be looking at properties that will open you up to at least 2 or 3 different tenant types. So what I mean by that is, if you, for example, if you buy a 2 or a 3-bed property, for example, you could get in there a single person could afford to rent that on their own, depending on what they do and what they want. A couple could take that out starting as a family, and a small family could also rent that. So all of a sudden you have a property where you have 3 different types of tenant profiles that can come and rent that house. So you don't want to go down the line too much of restricting yourself in terms of the type of property you purchase is only suitable for this tenant profile and this tenant profile alone. You want to try and ensure that whatever you're buying will at least attract 2 different types of tenant profiles, so you can open up your catchment to who will rent that property from you once you've purchased. So it's just thinking a little bit out of the box. Unless you get an absolute steal of a property's purchase, then fair enough. But if the numbers are a little bit conservative, you want to make sure that you're widening your tenant net in terms of when it comes to achieving the most amount of rent and the most amount of sort of tenant profile groups. I think that we will see, because it's inevitable, we will see an uplift in landlords looking to sell their properties. I think a lot of landlords who may have been in the game for a very, very long time, and they are probably naturally moving towards their retirement phase in their investment journey, we'll see an uplift in landlords coming to market to sell their properties. That may present interesting, I won't say good deals, but it may present interesting deals for us in new investors or investors that are still in the market. I think another thing is, if you are a landlord and you are thinking about selling your property because the time is becoming right for you to sell, then I would probably say, if that's the case, you might want to think about selling earlier next year rather than later, because you'd want to get in on the sales market before things like the stamp duty changes on the 1st of April, before the renters' rights, some of the renters' rights bill kicks in possibly around the summertime, where we might have to serve longer notices to our tenants. So rather than serving 2 months notice for a sales procedure, it will be 4 months notice. So if you are definitely thinking that you want to sell 1 or 2 properties, or you're on your retirement phase for your portfolio, then I'd probably say looking at the first quarter of next year as a landlord looking to sell a property would be probably a period for you to seriously consider, only because once you push into April, a lot of the changes would have kicked in. So you can take advantage of that now, because that's what you need to do, and now is the time to act. And from Boxing Day, the market is open again. Rightmove always report that Boxing Day is one of their busiest days of the year for people searching online for properties to buy. Once everyone's sort of stuffed their face over Christmas, the next thing is, right, let's jump online and start looking at what we need to do for next year.
Yeah.
Apparently the views and the hits on their website is one of the biggest on that day. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Same trend every year,
Yeah.
every single year.
so that's probably
Exactly the same thing.
a good time to think about. If you're thinking of selling timing wise, I'd say if you want to time the market, then you're looking at sort of Boxing Day into New Year's,
Yeah.
so that you can potentially avoid some of those changes that are coming probably in Q2 and beyond of next year. Would you agree?
Exactly that, 100%. We've just got one thing here. Do VA and Abbey have a joint venture? So this is what we're doing at the moment. We're trying to educate as many landlords as possible. Reason being is because, as you know, we're investors plus we're letting agents at the same time as well. This is a massive change that's going to really be shaking up the whole industry, right? So it's very important that everyone has access to this. I mean, I don't know why people are not talking about this right now, because this is going to be one of the biggest changes that has taken place in over a decade or two, right? So hence it's really important. So our main sort of aim here at the moment is just provide as much information as possible, let it all out, let everyone know about it, etc. as well. If they need any help, they can get in touch with us. But the main thing is to make everyone aware of it, so they don't all of a sudden get hit by it and not know, because a lot of the time people don't know that something has changed. So for example, there might be, I remember hearing something about when a pedestrian crossing something, it's their right instead of the car, something like this. But the thing is, you don't end up finding out about this stuff until you hit someone or some sort of case has sort of taken place, etc. But you don't want to be that sort of case study at the same time as well, right? So hence really important to get this information out as much as possible, so anyone and everyone can benefit from it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the last points to touch on in terms of growing your portfolio into the new year in 2025, a lot of landlords are also looking at away from residential property and perhaps considering commercial property. I don't know, as landlords on this particular night, if we're all residential landlord investors, but there is the other side to investment type, which is the commercial opportunities, which comes with, you know, every market has its pros and cons, but there's a lot of pros when you're looking at commercial in terms of you get long-term, very long-term business tenants. Most leases are signed on a 5, 7, 10-year basis. Most times leases for commercial properties, when you're renting them out as landlords, they come on what's known as a self-repairing lease. So if you do some homework and you look into commercial property, again, you've got to be very careful. No different to residential purchases, but when you're buying a commercial property, if you think that might be a strategy that you'd like to explore, location is absolutely key, because what type of commercial tenant will be attracted to that location is what's going to determine how quickly it will rent and what you'll get for it. But there are a lot of positives there. If you're looking to diversify your residential portfolio and add a commercial unit in there, then you could benefit from a whole different type of tenancy. It doesn't come with all the renters' rights bill attached to it. You will have longer term business tenants. You won't have lots of repair bills coming your way, because most commercial leases are self-repairing leases where the business tenant has to take care of that property themselves, come what may, for whatever reason. So that might be another aspect. We haven't got time to go deep into commercial property tonight, but it's just another thing to throw out to us as investors, that I think a lot of the time we're always looking down the residential road because that's what we know and that's what we do. But there is that commercial road that we could look to take with some homework, with some research behind us. That might be another good investment type, depending on your profile as an investor. So do think about that. That's just a little nugget we wanted to drop in there. But do think about commercial versus residential, because that might be a way to kind of put some of your investment money into. But I think in summary, property investing is still a good space. It will always be a good space. We will always have choppy waters to navigate, because the law will always change and, you know, things are always evolving. I think it's just like Zahid said, we're here to bring this sort of information to the landlord market so that you're aware of it. We break it down as quickly and as simply as we can so that you can understand it and then use that to propel yourself forward as landlords. But it's always going to be a good space to put your money in comparison to maybe some other investment opportunities. Yes, I'm not saying don't have a diverse set of investments, but property, bricks and mortar, especially when you're in it for the long term, is always a solid guarantee of a return. So I would say, you know, well, we will navigate next year. We'll navigate the Renters' Right Bill changes, stamp duty increases, we'll number crunch even harder to ensure that that the deals that we're getting on the table will work for us in the long term. I think that you just got to ensure that you've done your homework, speak to a good agent, compliance all the way. I think gone are the days that landlords can and this has been happening for years, but especially as we move into 2025, gone are the days that landlords can feel that they can duck and dive from compliance. That's just not happening anymore.
Yeah.
And that's way before the Renters' Rights Bill, but it will certainly be even heavier once the bill passes by the summer or so next year. So please don't skip on compliance for the sake of money or the sake of thinking that you can just Google it, because it's not always usually as simple as that. Speak to an agent, even if you don't want a management agent, a letting agent can set you up in several different ways to ensure that you're compliant from the beginning. Those sort of things will pay dividend towards the middle end of your tenancy. So I think those are the main things from us. If there's anything that you would like to hear about from us in the future, just drop us a note in the chat box and we will make a note of that, and we can either send out relevant information via email, or we'll be back next year with some other lives and bringing you, like we said, the most pertinent things of the landlord investment market to keep your, like Zahid said, keep your property business profitable and keeping you moving forward as an investor. That's our job as local agents. So I hope tonight's been interesting for you and you've been able to glean one or two things from what we've shared. We've had to go a bit on fast forward because we wanted to get quite a lot in a short space of time. I don't think we have any other questions that I've missed. Do you want to
disconnected everyone, so that's what happened.
Okay.
That's cool.
But I don't think we have. We're still live on Zoom.
Yeah, we're live on Zoom. The TikTok got disconnected, but
okay,
it's not probably.
I don't think there's any new questions. I think
Couple more questions, I think.
Oh, could you go to the chat box?
Yes.
Here
we go. Yeah.
Thanks for the info. Would be good to have an interactive. Thanks for the information. Would be good to have an interactive or meet and greet to share experiences. Absolutely, I think landlord forums, agency forums are really, really, really important. I think where there's already talk of that going on in Luton, where landlords and agencies we're going to start putting together forums, so that we can meet and greet and share experiences. Because most of the time, learning comes from experience. Yes, yes, we can read all we like, but it's in practical experience that we really learn. So yeah, we're definitely an advocate of putting together sort of networking opportunities. There's also a networking, an investment networking group called PIN, Property Investor Network Luton. That's a really good, if you're local to Luton, they have them all over the UK, to be fair. So wherever you're based, if you were to Google PIN, Property Investment Network, you will see that there's an investment network club that meets every month in many, many cities around the UK, where investors come together every month to share, network, and there's always speakers that will give out keynote information. So that's another way to network. If you've not heard of PIN before, just Google it. It's established by a guy called Simon Zucci. But there are many property networking forums on and offline these days, but I think that's what we're looking into in Luton.
I think that's actually a really good suggestion. So I think what we'll do is, after this webinar, me and Venessa will have a conversation about what we can bring out to be able to help you guys out. Because at the end of the day, there is enough demand for us to be able to help someone out. We can prep something. So right now, it's more so that we're talking. We could possibly even look into something where it's more of like an open sort of conversation, where a bunch of us can sort of connect together, etc. Everyone can ask questions. We can sort of bounce off each other at the same time as well. Obviously, naturally, myself and Venessa, we know the most inside the room, etc. But we're happy to sort of share your experiences of what you have as well. And we could also do like a live where we get people's questions there and then, and we can sort of deal with it. And they can sort of even delve a little bit more into detail about it. We could even look at scenarios, etc. as well. So.
I have meet and greet over dinner. Yeah, I like the sound of a meet and greet over dinner. Somebody on Instagram said that. So whoever's buying, I'm there. And I think what's last to say, just to wish everybody a very lovely festive season, compliments of the season to one and to all. And we look forward to being of service to yourselves and more in 2025 and beyond. We're both here. You can look us both up online. And it's been a pleasure kind of being your live experts tonight. So thank you very much and good night.